industrialization, gases to continue to accumulate through economic progress. And today, when we drive a car, when we turn on our lights, all of those fossil fuels that are being burnt are still adding gases to the atmosphere.
Okay.
So the whole issue of anthropogenic, it means that it is the impact of man that is causing the changes that we are seeing in our environment.
Okay. Now, both of you mentioned, of course, one of the major effects of climate change are the rising sea levels for both that are directly affecting now the Bahamas and the Republic of Maldives. What are some other effects of climate change that your respective countries have also or are also experiencing?
Well, basically, when we talk about climate change, we're talking about our survival. Survival really depends on whether or not we can exist as a sovereign state. If we cannot, then we're going to lose. Everyone is going to lose. So that's why I think Philip really mentioned how the Alliance of Small Islands formed, how we have worked in the international arena, how we can try and make a difference.
Right.
That's our objective of the Alliance of Small Island States. We're working for survival. We are saying to the world communities, survival is non-negotiable, because if we don't exist, then what can you tell us?
What are some of the other islands or nations that are represented under AOSIS?
We have got the islands in the Pacific, islands in the Indian Ocean, Atlantic, South China Sea, and the Caribbean islands. So we've got 43 islands represented in the preparatory meeting here in Grenada. So we are trying to develop our own positions as the island states' positions for the next UNFCCC, that's a Framework Convention on Climate Change Negotiation session that is going to be held from the 10th to 14th of August. So we as a group of countries are trying to prepare among ourselves, where Philip has mentioned that we have the common in most of the issues when it comes to climate change. So we as a group is going to lobby and try and make our voices heard.
All right. What are some of the specific points that are being discussed during this meeting that both of you?
Well, this is a preparatory meeting. And a preparatory meeting is intended to deal with the negotiations that have the positions that have been put for us to try to reach a common position on. So, for instance, the convention process at the moment is dealing with the Kyoto Protocol. And so under the convention process, there has been created an ad hoc working group that's intended to deal with what happens next with the Kyoto Protocol. And the Kyoto Protocol is intended to deal with mitigating the adverse effects of climate change through a project-based mechanism. So a developed country needs to reduce its emission. It does so by investing in activities taking place in a developing country. So you will have a situation where a large country would take actions in another country. The reduction in greenhouse gases is credited, and funds are then flow into, so that process comes to an end in 2012. What then happens afterwards is what the negotiation is all about. And then we also have issues dealing with what's called the long-term cooperative action under the convention. And the convention, or the enhanced implementation of the convention. The convention is being implemented, but the results of the implementation is not as fast as everyone needs. We know is not happening fast enough. The targets for the reduction of emissions are too small. Cumulatively, it's 5.3 or 5.8% reduction. We need much larger reductions than that. So we need to reduce the levels of gases in the atmosphere at the pre-industrial levels against the 1990 down to a much significant figure, the lower than 5%. And how do we get there is what we're talking about with regards to the Kyoto Protocol, as well as the long-term cooperative action under the convention.
A roadmap.
That's correct. The Bali roadmap has led to the discussions and the negotiations that are ongoing at the moment. But you asked a question to Amjad just a few moments ago as to what are the impacts of climate change that we're seeing in our own countries. And the Bahamas is no different from Grenada. You had Ivan. We have had our march of storms also. So we are seeing the increased effects of more frequent and more intense tropical processes And that's not the only issue that you see. There are also health effects. It is warmer than it has been in our parents' history in recorded time. So therefore, the issue of health, and the persons more vulnerable to rising temperatures is the young and the old.
Sure.
And so we are seeing more issues related to heat stress. We're also seeing a lot of the response measures that we have to take. We're now desalinating water in the Bahamas at a rate that we have never done so before. And the same thing is in the Maldives. You have to desalinate water. And that is an energy-intensive operation.
Of course.
You're buying fossil fuels, you're using an imported product to produce water, which is a basic commodity of survival that's needed in small island states or anyone anywhere around the world. So those
have to pay for the water as well.
You pay for the water, you pay for the oil. For the Bahamas, our fuel bill in 2008 was $1.1 billion. That was the cost, what it cost the Bahamas government to buy fossil fuel for power generation and transport as well as vehicles. That's simply what it is. That's a huge percentage of our budget. That's a huge percentage of our earnings. In addition to that, we have to pay the consequences of climate change. So when we have a hurricane and it destroys a road, who pays for it? We do. When you have a hurricane that destroys a clinic, who pays for it? We do. So this whole preparatory meeting is trying to deal with those issues. Who pays for us to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change? It should be the polluter. It shouldn't be the person that bears the brunt of the response.
All right. Is anything being done on a local level, local for the Bahamas, local for the Republic of Maldives, to try and help yourselves or help the situation as best as you can?
Yes. 17 years ago, the convention came into force. And we, as a state party to the convention, we signed and ratified, hoping that, well, and good. I mean, we are going to do something, tangible out of this process. But so far, regrettably, we haven't seen much being implemented.
Okay.
But having said that, Maldives, or unlike other countries, are not waiting. We are doing a lot on our own, and we are even showing to the international community, look, this is what we have done because of the impact of climate change. Our people are not going to wait until someone comes and build a seawall, or until someone comes and relook at our people. There are growing concerns, like, the weather patterns. People have been adapting, ever since people have started, inhabited the island communities, but they're not waiting to someone. But, the rate which it occurs is something that the people cannot catch up. The speedy implementation that the people wanted to survive is the real urgency that the international community, or whoever have polluted or whoever have created the problem, there is a moral responsibility.
Do you think those who have caused the problem have accepted that and are owning up to it?
One other thing is that in the whole atmosphere, the industrialized nations have captured, and we have only a limited number of space. And what we are asking for them is not really begging. Really what we're asking is, there is a debt. There is a climate debt. There's an adaptation debt that you owe us, that you have to pay for us.
No, but we are doing things. I mean, this is one of the most interesting discussions in the climate change discussion. There is a general perception that all developing countries want is like a beggar with a handout looking for another handout.
Right.
But all of our countries are paying the price now of adapting to climate change. If you change your policy, if you go away from groundwater to desalination, that incremental, that different cost between what you used to do and what you have to do now is such that you are paying the price of the impacts of climate change. When we have a storm surge, as we had in the case of a storm surge where water washed from one side of an island to the other, and freshwater resources were impacted. People lost their lives. We are bearing that cost when we have to rebuild a road and build a road at a different standard to raise it higher than it was before. We are paying those costs.